Hi guys! Welcome to the Diet Talk Life Athlete Webinar of the Week. This is Dr. Corey, and we're going to talk about the 3 P's of goal pursuit, methods that I use in my own life to make my goals sticky, more meaningful, and more purposeful. So if you are finding that you struggle with staying motivated and feeling that, I guess, high level of energy and sense of vitality as you're moving closer and closer towards what you believe to be very important, this is for you, okay? As I mentioned, it's oftentimes not necessarily about the goal itself when that motivation starts to wane and you come into that trough. It's more about how you're pursuing it. It's about your approach. So the 3 P's, guys, I'm going to name them for you right now, and then I'm going to go through each one and explain what they mean and give you some examples. So the first P is practice. My favorite word on the planet, among others. It's one of my favorites. The second P is persistence, and the third P is perspective. Okay, so practice. I want you guys to think about how when you started on this path towards weight loss or fitness, whether you remember your goal being about weight loss and about changing your body in some way with fitness. I remember when I set the goal of finding a partner, for example, the goal was about finding a partner. I'm getting somewhere with this. The outcome was the target, the partner, okay? And the steps I put into place were centered around finding him, the partner, okay? Getting on Match.com, completing that profile, making sure that I didn't sound like a terrible, horrible human being that no one would like to date, choosing the appropriate photos to put on my profile, and I consulted a number of people who are important in my life to see what they thought once I had all of that together. It was about making a structure for choosing who to contact and who to respond to. I actually had a spreadsheet and this whole mapped out thing. It is kind of silly to me thinking about it now, but it helped me stay organized and, like I said, have a structure around how I was going to do this and how I was going to manage my time for the goal of the target of the partner, okay? It was all practical stuff. Steps, structure, organization, and I had built a really fine-tuned system. Okay. Now, when it finally came to the dates themselves, though, I realized that there was so much more than the partner involved in this process, okay? There was the partnership. And what that might look like, who I wanted to be in the relationship, and how we were going to communicate and co-create whatever this thing was going to become. And without that stuff, okay, I realized that the goal of the partner, that it needed a different level of attention. Okay, it meant something entirely different. The partnership, the partner, completely different things. So I had a lot that needed some level of focus, okay, if the partner goal was going to be a sticky one, a meaningful one, and purposeful, right? So I needed to review and revise my system. Okay, here's where practice comes in. There's all this stuff that comes in between the setting of the goal. I'm going to lose weight, right? And the goal itself. And that system level stuff, that's the practice. Okay? The first P, practice. I had to wrap my mind and body around the pursuit being about practicing becoming appropriate for the goal. I want you to kind of pause here. Practice means becoming appropriate for the goal. You set the goal of weight loss. Practice means becoming appropriate as you approach the weight loss. Okay? So the dates, when I got on Match.com and was going through my process, the dates themselves were my practice ground. Okay, they were the playing field. And I did meet a lot of players. They were uncomfortable a lot of times, the dates were, but they needed to be, all right? They were uncomfortable because I had a lot of things that needed working through and a working out. That's what the practice is. Anytime we have set a goal that we want to move towards, practice must be deliberate. There's a purpose to what we are doing, all right? So, just like we do with our weight loss or fitness, we need to practice becoming appropriate for that outcome. You guys, I know, have probably heard the saying, Rome wasn't built in a day, okay? Rome wasn't built in a day reminds us how important the practice piece is. It's ongoing. And so even when we reach the outcome, the number on the scale or the body fat percentage, the practice continues, right? The saying also continues. It goes, Rome wasn't built in a day, but there were bricks laid every hour. That's practice, all right? I have the partner now. I met the goal. Okay. Accomplished! Touchdown! But you know what? It's not going to be sticky, meaningful, or purposeful if I don't continue the practice, the laying of the bricks every single day. So if I want to become increasingly more appropriate for the partner and the partnership, for the sustainability of the partner and the partnership, guess what? I got to keep laying the bricks. I got to keep practicing, right? I have to be deliberate about who and how I want to be within this partnership. Okay. Practice inherently involves making mistakes too. And I can say this with much humor because I've made a ton of them. I met the goal of the partner, and as I've continued to practice, many mistakes have been made by him and me, right? So if the practice inherently involves making mistakes, that means that we're going to be reflecting upon what we can learn from them, that we need to be clear about and intentional about setting new intentions and asking new questions that we can explore, and then trying again, okay? So practice is a process. It's a process of systematizing, right? And what I mean by that is when we find what works, we can kind of put it into our arsenal or our sequence that we can continue repeating because it works. Now that doesn't mean that there aren't going to be different circumstances or situations that come into play that are going to demand that exploration, the asking of questions, the practice. But it is a long game of experimenting. It's a long game of discovering through a number of things, through being curious, through asking questions, and through developing this desire to just understand the hows, the whys, the whats, the wheres, and the whens. Okay? And it allows us to be able to say, oh, all right, okay, like I've got all of these inputs and information coming in. If X occurs, the most appropriate action would be Y. That's what practice allows us to do Practice allows us to become appropriate for the goal that we have set. So we've covered the first P, that's practice. The second P is persistence, okay? Now, when we view the pursuit of a goal as a practice of becoming appropriate for the outcome, persistence doesn't sound so daunting. I think a lot of us can get sort of bogged down and like, oh, more again, again, and again, and again. That's persistence. It's like doing it repeatedly. And deliberate practice is about repetition. It is. If I think about how I practiced pedaling my bike to understand how to do that skillfully and effectively, it was a process of stops and starts. Okay, do it again. All right, let's see what needs to be changed there. Okay, do it again. And then when I was learning to unclip from my pedals, same thing. All right, it's a practice of deliberate repetition, review, and revision. All right. Now, because if we're practicing, we expect to do things incorrectly and unskillfully. I knew when I started riding my bike and learning all of the different elements that were involved that I was going to look like a spasmo. And there are still times that I do. But being able to laugh at myself allows me to be more persistent in that. So with practice, guys, we're stumbling. We're having to slow down and think about the sequence or the order in which we're doing things. And in doing so, we end up coloring outside the lines a lot, or riding into trees or off the road or things like that, or just falling completely over because I couldn't unclip. And I have a lot of war wounds to show for all of the mistakes I've made in the glory of persistence. Okay, but let's use the bike analogy to kind of dig into this a little more. I want you guys to think back to when you learned how to ride a bike. Okay, some of you had the good fortune of training wheels, I would imagine. They're like guardrails, right? So they prevented you from getting too hurt or making too big a mistake, but you could still fall, all right? So you practice to become more appropriate and skillful on this moving object. So you were practicing balance, steering, paying attention to multiple things at one time, including like pedaling, moving of the handlebars, stopping, watching the road around you, all right? Try not to run into people or things. And as you became more proficient at one skill, you were able to take on another skill and then another skill. Like my cycling coach doesn't give me too much all at once because he knows that there's this process of scaffolding that needs to occur, lest I throw my hands up in the air and I'm like, I can't freaking do it. It's too much at one time. I'm overwhelmed, all right? But what happens then, one day you remove the training wheels because you were appropriately skillful on a bike with training wheels. All right, so now there needs to be another challenge to be explored. So you might feel scared, you might feel anxious because with any new challenge, there are going to be a series of unknowns now and some uncertainties, right? I remember when the training wheels came off my bike, not as an adult, as a kid. I rode straight through my grandma's petunia garden, okay? There are new skills to be learned and practiced to become appropriate on a bike without training wheels. And what happens is you persist because you've seen that with practice in other situations and settings in other areas of your life, you have become more skillful. So you've seen that you can, all right? Despite the fear, despite the discomfort, you've grown in your sense of competence, all right? So persistence is promoted by a commitment to practice, a commitment to practicing becoming more and more and more appropriate for the goal. Okay, and it's bolstered by the confidence that comes as a result of that growing appropriateness, right? Guys, confidence, I think, is this misunderstood term a lot, and all it is having faith in your ability to figure it out. Confidence isn't, I have all the answers, and I absolutely know I can do this. That's not confidence. Confidence is just, I believe I can figure it out, which inherently has the foundation of, I don't know a lot of things. I just think that's really reassuring for me, personally. I don't know a lot of things, but I'm pretty sure that with support and coaching and research and the knowledge from other people and practice, that I can figure it out, okay? So, coming back to weight, how do we become more and more and more appropriate for the goal of a certain weight, right? Well, we accept new challenges like eating out, trying new foods, using a food log to assess not just the amount of food that's going down the hatch, but how about the quality of the foods that we're choosing, right? We ask our coaches what we might kind of anticipate as we move forward, because we recognize that we don't know what we don't know. So we oftentimes rely on people who have been there before, done that before, become skillful at certain endeavors and goals that we are pursuing currently, in order to be able to kind of look ahead a little bit. It's almost like they have this crystal ball, and they can say, okay, so we might be moving into this situation now. These are the things that you might anticipate. These are the thoughts you might end up having. These are the challenges that you might experience. How might we deal with those? All right? That's part of that persistence and practice piece as well. So we become literally, as we're pursuing this goal with practice and persistence, what we develop is this like unquenchable hunger and thirst, not because we're dieting for fat loss. It's a thirst for knowledge that we can then begin to incorporate into our toolboxes so that we are appropriate for the goal outcome when we get there. Make sense? Okay. Third P, guys, is perspective. Okay? All right. So, with all of that stuff being said already, we're building up our toolboxes through practice, through persistence, to become appropriate. There's a pacing element to practice and persistence, okay? We want to be unquenchable, like I said, but we also need to practice recognizing when we're drowning, right? How many of you have felt that sometimes during goal pursuits? Oh my God. Can't do this anymore. I don't want to. I don't feel like it. It's overwhelming. I don't know where to turn. I'm not focused. Drowning, okay? Because we're trying to drink from a fire hose a lot of times. It's just too much coming in at us at one time. Sometimes we need a slower drip. 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 Like titrating the information in any given moment, okay? We've all been in situations where it's just the inputs are far too quick, okay? And they come in from everywhere, from the people around us, from our coaches, from social media, from everything that we're reading. They're all around us, and sometimes we need to clear out the noise, okay? We've also been on the other end, I think, where, and I'll speak for myself, I have, where it's just not coming quickly enough, all right? That's called boredom. We go from overwhelm to the other end of the continuum called boredom, all right? So when you think about practice and pursuit, we're doing this dance. We're toggling between overwhelm and boredom, and so we need to develop this level of perspective to be able to say, okay, I need to slow down here, or okay, now's a good time for me to, you know, go search and discover some more things, have another challenge. Sometimes we need more, other times we need less. And the recognition of this is the third P. That's perspective. So perspective is like that. It's like the infrastructure that we can't necessarily see because it doesn't have an outcome or an endpoint, right? It's happening inside of us. And it's like a program running in the background on your computer. Or the foundation of your home, it's the plumbing and the pipes that are going to help to regulate the practice of a smoothly running home, okay? So how might we know if we're using perspective, though? How do we know if we're using it? Well, we might hear ourselves say something like this. I need to sit with this for a bit before taking on something new. Or let me practice that a few times before we move on, all right? Can we just focus there and then see how it goes? So you might hear yourself say things like that, or I'm feeling a little overwhelmed by all of this. Maybe we could just focus on one thing and practice integrating that. So that's you pacing yourself. And I think that a lot of us start to get really, really impatient because when we set this goal of weight loss, we may have said, I got to do it by this date. I have this cruise this summer. We leave on this day. Like, I have to be this weight by then. Well, guess what, guys? I'm sorry to break it to you, but there are a lot of things that we don't have any control over that come in that are inputs as we are pursuing those goals, okay? We can't, that we can't even necessarily anticipate unless we were to, I don't know, have some level of intelligence beforehand. And this is a really smart thing to do. Sit down and be like, okay, you know, this would be the ideal, but these are all the things that could potentially shift the game a little bit, all right? I don't watch football, but the thing that just popped into my head was you're in the middle of a game and the quarterback gets injured. Now what do you do? That's not ideal. It wasn't necessarily maybe what you planned for. Well, okay, maybe you have a substitute quarterback. Well, what happens if you don't have a substitute quarterback? Now what? That's the sort of thing that persistence allows us to move through, and practice allows us to become appropriate for those unanticipated circumstances that are always, always, always going to pop up, okay? So that's you being able to take perspective and run the process instead of the process running you. You run the process, okay? Instead of the process towards that outcome running you, all right? I hope that makes sense. Didn't mean to confuse you there. So the 3 P's, guys, let's review. Practice and deliberate practice. Intentional practice to become appropriate for the outcome. And then we have persistence, right? With the added knowledge and foundation that, you know what, we're going to be making mistakes, and those mistakes are they're part of the becoming appropriate process. We need them because they force us to ask questions, to feel around in the dark, and to learn new things. And then we have the perspective, number 3, third P, right? Which is that pacing and recognition and being able to look at things through different lenses. All right? Okay, let's do this. Practice, persistence, perspective.